You ever see one of those news stories that just makes you scratch your head? A successful doctor, a high-powered executive, maybe even a politician, caught shoplifting something totally minor, something they could have bought 100 times over without even thinking about it. It makes zero sense, right? Well, today, we're going to get into the really complex psychology behind why otherwise good, honest people risk literally everything for a petty crime that seems completely irrational.
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? This is the paradox we're diving into. And I'll tell you right now, it's almost never about need, and it's rarely about simple greed. The real answer is way deeper. It's buried in a mix of brain chemistry, hidden emotional wounds, and these incredible, workarounds our minds create to deal with pain.
So get this. This is a real case. You have a person at the absolute top of their game, an acting U.S. Army secretary. Their reputation, their entire career is on the line, and they risk it all for about $30 worth of clothing. That's not just a crime, that's a genuine psychological puzzle. Or how about this one? A surgeon, a profession that is built on an incredible amount of trust and precision, caught stealing from his coworkers' lockers while they are literally in the middle of surgery. And this isn't just a couple of weird one-off stories. These are classic examples of what experts call atypical theft, and they show that there's something much more complicated going on right under the surface. Okay, so to really get our heads around this fascinating behavior, here's how we're going to break it down. We're going to start with the addictive high of the act itself, then dig into the deep-seated reasons behind it. We'll look at how people justify the unthinkable, and then we'll get into some surprising triggers, and finally, the path to recovery. So, first up, let's look at what's happening in the moment. For a lot of these folks, the act of stealing isn't really about the thing they take. That's not the prize. The real reward is something happening inside their own body. It's a biological rush of chemicals that can become unbelievably addictive. And a huge ingredient in this chemical cocktail is something called schadenfreude. It's a German word, and it basically means getting pleasure from someone else's misfortune. A psychologist, Dr. Robert Tymensky, explains there's this perverse thrill in spoiling something for another person, like grabbing a Christmas package off a stranger's porch. It's a really twisted way to try and level a playing field that feels totally unfair. And you might think this is super rare, but it's not. Experts estimate that about 3 million Americans are genuinely addicted to that high they get from stealing. That feel-good moment, it lights up the brain's dopamine reward system the exact same way that gambling or drinking does. It's a real addiction. And this feeling is everything. For someone who might feel small or powerless in the rest of their life, the secret act of stealing gives them this jolt of strength. It's like a little victory, a private exercise of power that no one else knows about. It's a moment of control in what might feel like a very chaotic world. But here's the thing. That addictive rush is really just the symptom. So what's the actual disease? More often than not, it's a deep, unhealed emotional wound that's tied to some past experience of loss. And this gets at a really fundamental quirk in how all of our brains are wired. It's called loss aversion. Basically, we are designed to feel the pain of a loss much, much more intensely than we feel the joy of a gain. Think about it. Having $50 stolen from you feels way worse than the happiness you get from finding $50 on the street. And this is where it all gets very personal. Many of these offenders are, without even realizing it, replaying what some experts call a stagnant water story. It's a painful memory of being deprived of something. Maybe it was a Christmas that got ruined, or the loss of a parent, or just this deep feeling of never getting what they deserved. Stealing becomes a way of taking a present for themselves, a way to try and even the score with the universe. Just like Dr. Tymensky says, theft becomes a really nifty workaround. It's this unconscious trick the brain plays to avoid doing the hard work of actually processing that old pain. Instead of feeling that old sting of loss, you get the immediate rush of taking something back. Okay, but if we're talking about fundamentally good moral people, how on earth do they live with themselves? How do they square this behavior with their own values? Well, they use some pretty powerful psychological defense mechanisms. The number one tool in the toolbox is dehumanization. The person stealing will mentally blot out the human victim. So you're not stealing a package from a family who was excited to get it. You're just taking something from an empty porch. You're not hurting a small business owner. You're just taking from a faceless corporation. This little mental filter effectively switches off the empathy that would normally make them feel guilty. And you know what makes this justification even easier? Doing it with other people. When people steal together, it can become this strange bonding experience. They become partners in crime, and they enable each other's behavior. The guilt, the responsibility, it gets psychologically split up among the group, so no single person has to feel the full weight of it. It's like, hey, if they think it's okay, then it must be okay. All right, so we've looked at the why and the how. Now let's shift gears and talk about some really surprising triggers for this behavior and what the path forward actually looks like. First off, we need to make a really important distinction. According to Dr. Will Kupchak, who studied this for decades, these offenders are not kleptomaniacs. That's a different thing. Kleptomania is driven by this irresistible impulse, and the act itself is about relieving tension. But atypical theft, that's almost always driven, at least in part, by some kind of repressed anger or even a desire for vengeance. It's a frustrated, self-defeating way of lashing out. And this is where things get really fascinating. There's a clinical factor here that almost no one talks about. In one of Dr. Kupchak's studies, a significant number of offenders had never stolen a thing in their lives until shortly after they started taking certain antidepressants. And if you look, the drug manufacturers themselves list potential side effects like disinhibition, increased hostility, and self-defeating acting out. That perfectly describes this behavior. It seems for some people, the medication might lower the very inhibitions that normally keep those angry impulses in check. So how does someone actually break this cycle? Well, one technique is to audit your own internal story. When that urge to steal pops up, the first step is to recognize it for what it is, that old stagnant water story of anger and loss. Then you run a simple test. You ask yourself, if I follow this thought, if I act on this impulse, where will I be in 24 hours? And if the honest answer is in jail, ashamed, with your life completely derailed, you can then make a conscious choice to just drop the thought. And this is so important. Recovery has to start with self-compassion. As Dr. Kupchak really emphasizes, the people caught in this cycle are not bad people. They are good, ethical people who are trapped in a self-defeating behavior that they themselves don't understand. And they absolutely deserve kindness and respect, especially from themselves. When you boil it all down, atypical theft is just a really dramatic external example of an internal script running on a loop to cope with pain. And that kind of leaves us with a pretty powerful question to think about for ourselves. If that's their script, what are the less obvious hidden scripts that might be running and maybe even sabotaging our own lives?